There's a moment I remember. Very specific. I'm sitting in a chair, not my chair, someone else's chair, across from a woman I don't know. She's waiting for me to speak. I want to speak. I'm trying to speak. But the words won't come out. My mouth opens. I can feel it opening. My jaw is moving, my throat is vibrating, but there is no sound. Nothing. Just the physical shape of speech with no actual language attached. And I can see her watching. I can feel her patience dying in real time. It's not visible in her face yet, she's still smiling that professional smile. But it's happening behind her eyes. The moment she stops believing I can do this. That's the thing about stuttering that nobody tells you, it's not about the words. It's not about being inarticulate or stupid or unprepared. It's about your body betraying you in public. It's about people watching you fail to do something they've never had to think about. Speaking. Something every human takes for granted. Something we do unconsciously, constantly, without effort. Except I can't. Or I can, but not always. Not predictably. Not when it matters. This is my story. Not the inspirational version you see in movies where the person overcomes their disability and becomes a powerful speaker. This is the real version. The version where you learn to live with something that doesn't go away. The version where you build an identity around the things that are supposed to break you. This is what it's like to be a person who stutters in a world that was built for fluent speech. I'm going to take you back. All the way back. To before I knew I was different. To the moment this started. I want to be honest with you from the beginning, I don't remember the exact moment I first stuttered. There's no memory of it. No red letter day where everything changed. Stuttering didn't arrive suddenly in my life like a diagnosis or an accident. It was always there. My earliest memory of language is of difficulty. Of frustration. Of words that wouldn't come out right, or came out too slowly, or came out in pieces. I grew up in different informal settlements around Cape Town. Which means my childhood was loud. Crowded. Multilingual. Everyone talking over everyone else. Multiple languages mixing, English, Xhosa, Afrikaans. Code switching between them constantly. And in that cacophony, there was me. Trying to speak. Trying to be heard. Trying to keep up. I don't think I realized I was different until I started school. That's when the comparison began. That's when I noticed other kids could just speak. Words came out. They raised their hands and participated. They told jokes and everyone laughed. I raised my hand and felt my throat close. That's when the story really begins. Before we go further, I need to tell you what I am and what I'm not. I'm not a person with a speech impediment who occasionally stumbles over words. I'm not someone who's shy or nervous or just needs to slow down and breathe. I'm a person who stutters. That means my speech is neurologically different. It's not psychological. It's not caused by anxiety, though anxiety makes it worse. It's not something I can overcome by being more confident or more prepared. Stuttering is a neurodevelopmental difference in how my brain controls the motor movements of speech. It's in my neurons. It's in the way my brain is wired. Some days it's barely noticeable. I can speak fluently for hours. I can give presentations. I can teach. I can talk to strangers. Some days I can't say my own name without blocking. When I stutter, a few things happen simultaneously. The thought is there. The intention to speak is there. I know exactly what I want to say. But somewhere between my brain and my mouth, the signal gets disrupted. The motor neurons fire in the wrong pattern. My vocal cords tense. My breathing gets out of sync with my articulation. It feels like my body is working against me. I might repeat a sound, b-b-b-bo. I might get stuck in a block, where I'm trying to force the word out but nothing comes, s-s-s-s-s-s-s-s. I might break the word into pieces, interview. Or I might pause completely, switch to an easier word, and never get to what I actually wanted to say. All of this happens in seconds. But in that second, everything changes. People react. They look away. They finish the sentence for me. They offer sympathy. They become uncomfortable. Some get impatient. Some get embarrassed for me. And I become hyper-aware of all of it. This is not a defect. This is not a problem with my intelligence, my vocabulary, my worth as a person. It's a neurological difference. But living in a world built for fluent speech, that transforms it into something more complicated. That's where the real story begins. I was maybe 6 years old. 7. Old enough to understand that I was saying things differently than other children. Old enough to notice their reactions. I don't remember it as a specific moment of cruelty, though there was cruelty later. I remember it as a slow, creeping awareness that something about the way I spoke was wrong. Where I reside, every survival is precarious. Everyone's dealing with poverty, instability, the daily reality of living in an informal settlement. Disability, any difference is not something that gets special attention or accommodation. You're not given space to be different. You adapt or you fall behind. My parents noticed the stuttering. I remember my mother trying to correct me. Slow down, view. Take your time. As if slowing down was the problem. As if I hadn't already tried everything, tried so hard that my face would get hot and my eyes would water. My father. I remember him less clearly, but I remember his impatience. Not cruelty. Just a man who had bigger things to worry about, and a son who couldn't just speak like a normal child. What I remember most is the feeling of taking up too much space. When I spoke, even with people who loved me, I was creating a moment that was uncomfortable. I was making people wait. I was disrupting the flow of conversation. So I learned to stay quiet. Staying quiet became my adaptation. In a home with limited resources, where every mouth to feed is a calculation, where survival is the priority, a child who takes longer to speak is a child consuming more patience, more time, more emotional energy. Better to not speak. Better to listen. Better to be the quiet one. Better to not take up space. This is where it began. Not with the stutter itself. With the shame of having a body that doesn't work the way society expects. School is where you learn that difference is dangerous. I was maybe 8 when I had a teacher, I won't name him, but he was one of those teachers who believed in tough love. He believed in public humiliation as a teaching tool. And I, unfortunately, gave him the perfect tool. He called on me to read aloud. This was torture for children who stutter. You're suddenly put on the spot, expected to speak smoothly, and if you can't, everyone watches it happen in real time. I started reading. And I got stuck. On a word, I think it was beautiful. I remember the word specifically because it felt like it was mocking me. Such a simple word. Such a common word. And I couldn't say it. The class started to giggle. Not mean yet. Just the kind of giggle kids do when something slightly awkward happens. But that's all it takes. The teacher didn't intervene. He let it happen. Let the class laugh while I sat there, frozen, unable to produce the word. Then he said, and I remember this exactly, come on, view. It's a simple word. Is something wrong with you? And that was it. That was the moment I understood, yes. Something is wrong with me. Not my intelligence. Not my preparation. Not my understanding. Something about my body, my brain, the way I'm made. Something wrong. After that, I became hypervigilant about speaking in class. I would prepare answers but not raise my hand. I would know the answer but stay silent. I'd have thoughts but keep them to myself. This had consequences. Teachers interpreted my silence as lack of engagement or lack of intelligence. They'd move me to the back of the class. They'd make notes in my file about behavioral issues. Because a child who won't participate is a problem child. But the problem wasn't my behavior. The problem was that I'd learned speaking was dangerous. What I didn't know then is that this silence would become a pattern. That I would spend the next 15 years trying to disappear in exactly this way, being present but voiceless, being in the room but not being heard. I still remember another teacher who believed in me, even thought I stuttered. She would let me stand in front of the class to teach other students English. There was a time I was transferred from Cape Town to Eastern Cape, and most students were struggling there, but when I arrived, I knew most of the things taught, especially English and maths. That teacher believed in me. Her name was Teacher Mathiza in Zedelke and Komekwi. Loneliness is the word I'd use now. But as a child, I didn't have language for what I was experiencing. I just knew that I was separate. Other kids made friends by talking. They'd form groups and bonds through conversation, through joke-telling, through the easy back and forth of childhood social interaction. I existed on the margins of these groups. I was friendly. I wasn't aggressive or mean. But I was quiet. And quiet kids in school are either invisible or weird. There's no middle ground. I had friends, or what I thought were friends. But they were friends who didn't really know me because I didn't tell them things. I didn't share the way my peers did. I wasn't part of the gossip networks or the inside jokes because you can't be part of those things if you're not comfortable speaking. I was a spectator in my own childhood. And worse, I was aware of it. I was aware that my silence was the problem. But I didn't know how to fix it. The stutter wasn't something I could just overcome through willpower. So I existed in the state of knowing I was failing at something basic, something every other child seemed to do effortlessly. What I was learning, in these formative years, is that my difference would cost me things. It would cost me friendships. It would cost me social status. It would cost me the casual ease that other kids had. And that cost would only increase as I got older. Adolescence is brutal for anyone. But for a teenager who stutters, it's a particular kind of hell. Everyone's insecure. Everyone's self-conscious. Everyone's worried about how they're perceived. And then you add a speech difference on top of that, something that makes you visibly, audibly different, and you're not just insecure. You're marked. I was maybe 14 when I first realized that my stutter made me sexually undesirable. Not that I had fully developed sexuality at 14, but I was aware of it as a looming presence. High school is where attraction becomes a currency, and I was immediately understanding that I didn't have what it took to participate in that economy. Girls, I was interested in girls. But the way teenage boys show interest is through confidence, through talking, through the ability to joke and flirt and make your intentions known through conversation. I couldn't do that. Or I could, but it was so effortful, so obvious that I was struggling, that it read as pathetic rather than charming. I retreated further into silence. But now it was a silence with an edge to it. I was angry. I was angry at my body. I was angry at the world for making speech so central to everything. I was angry at other people for not understanding, for not being patient, for moving on when I took too long to speak. And I was angry at myself for not being able to just be normal. This anger became another layer of my identity. The quiet, angry kid. The one who seemed like they didn't want to talk. Who seemed hostile or depressed. When actually, I was just scared. I stopped trying in certain ways. I gave up on the idea that I could be a normal teenager. I gave up on the idea that I could casually date or flirt or participate in the social hierarchies that seemed to matter so much to everyone else. Instead, I invested in other things. Academics, for one. I could write. I could prepare. I could hide behind preparation. I invested in being smart. If I couldn't be socially successful, at least I could be academically successful. At least I could prove that the stutter didn't mean I was stupid. I was around 16 when I decided to be invisible on purpose instead of invisibly failing at being visible. It sounds like a small shift in psychology, but it was massive. I was no longer trying and failing. I was choosing not to try. And that felt like power, even though it was actually just a more sophisticated kind of defeat. Here's something nobody tells you about being disabled, especially visibly or audibly disabled: you become a code switcher. You learn to be different people in different contexts. You learn what version of yourself is acceptable in which spaces. You learn to modulate not just your speech but your entire presentation to minimize how much you stand out. At home, I was one person. Quiet, but present in a familiar way. My family was used to my stutter. They'd learn to wait, or they'd learn to fill in words, or they'd learn that my silence didn't mean I wasn't engaged. At school, I was someone else. More guarded. More prepared. Every interaction was calculated. What am I going to say? How long is it going to take me to say it? Will it be worth the effort and the potential humiliation? In Fulini, around other kids in the community, I was yet another person. Different class than most of them. Different education. Different aspirations. The stutter was almost beside the point, I was already marked as different for other reasons. And then there were the spaces where I could almost pretend to be normal. I discovered early that I could communicate in writing without stuttering. The words came out perfectly. No blocks, no repetitions, no struggle. But there's a cost to this. I'm learning to exist primarily in my head, in writing, in spaces where I can control my disability. And that makes the real world, the embodied, spoken world, feel increasingly hostile and impossible. I'm 17 years old, and I'm already practicing the art of avoidance that will define my 20s. By the end of high school, I developed what I can only describe as a philosophy of masks. I understood that I couldn't be myself in most spaces. That who I actually was, someone thoughtful, someone with ideas, someone with a stutter, wasn't acceptable. So I created versions of myself that were more acceptable. The quiet, smart kid. The guy who observes and doesn't participate. The person who's independent and prefers solitude. The intellectual who communicates better in writing. These weren't all lies. They were all true. But they were curated truths. They were the aspects of myself that could exist without the stutter being a central problem. The problem with this philosophy is that you eventually lose track of which version is actually you. I would go into situations, a class, a social gathering, a family event, and I'd be so focused on managing which version of myself to present that I wasn't actually present. I was performing an acceptable version of disability while the real me, confused, scared, struggling, was hidden underneath. This is the psychological cost of living in a world not built for you. You don't just manage your disability. You manage people's reactions to your disability. You manage the discomfort that your difference creates in others. You become responsible for making them comfortable with something that's causing you immense pain. And you do this so consistently, so automatically, that you stop questioning whether it's fair. You just accept that this is the price of existing. I was the top of my class in my matric and was accepted at the University of Cape Town for Social Sciences degree. I was also accepted at the University of the Western Cape for LLB. Even though I grew wanting to be a lawyer, many people discouraged me, that because of my stutter I would not make it. I chose University of Cape Town because it was the best university in 2001, still today. I remember during the awards ceremony in year I was also a top student. I picked up also the awards. Attending university was supposed to be the moment where everything changed. This was supposed to be where I stepped into my potential, where I became the smart person who'd been hiding behind the quiet kid persona. This was supposed to be where I overcame the stutter. I chose University of Cape Town. I chose social sciences. I chose a path that seemed to play to my strengths: academics, theory, writing. I could minimize the speaking component. I could write papers instead of giving presentations. I could participate in seminars through written contributions. Or so I thought. Seminars are where the problem became visible. In a lecture, you can hide. You're one of hundreds. The professor doesn't see you individually. You can take notes, absorb the material, write brilliant essays that no one will ever know you wrote if you don't speak up about them. But in a seminar, there are maybe 20 people. The professor expects participation. The class discussion depends on everyone contributing. And if you don't speak, you're marked. You're the quiet one. You're the one who seems disengaged or intellectually inferior or just difficult. I tried. God, I tried. I would prepare comments for seminars. I would write them out. I would practice them. I would raise my hand and then nothing. Or blocks. Or repetitions. Or I'd abandon the prepared comment and say something much simpler than what I'd actually intended. And I would sit there, face hot, convinced that everyone was judging me. Some of them probably were. But mostly, I think people moved on quickly. They didn't care that much. But I was hyper-focused on my own failure. There was one professor who, when I'd stutter in class, would say, "Take your time," in this very patient, sympathetic voice. And every single time, it made me want to die. Not because she was cruel. Because she was kind. Because her kindness made it clear that I needed patience, that I needed accommodation, that I was not like the other students. Pity is its own form of othering. I made it through university. I did well academically. I wrote good papers. I had ideas that my professors respected. But I left university more convinced than ever that I had two options: be smart and silent, or attempt to speak and be exposed as struggling. There was no third option. No space where I could be smart and articulate and fluent at the same time. I didn't believe that was possible for someone like me. After university, I struggled to find employment. I attended many interviews, but I struggled to express myself in the interviews. I decided that I will wear mask, figurative, and work in an environment where I would not go for interviews or required to speak as the requirement for the position. I submitted my CVs at the warehouses and retail jobs. I worked at different warehouses around Western Cape. Some of the warehouses I worked at include ShopRite, Woolworths, a 5-store, Checkers. I would work at receiving where I would not be required to speak with the customers. I left university in June 2006, worked in retail until 2015, that time I have given up on finding employment. I went back to the University of Cape Town to pursue a postgraduate diploma, graduated in 2016, while I worked as a research assistant at UCT and at an NPO CDRA. After graduating, I was accepted for a master's degree at the University of Cape Town. But I had to deregister after struggles of not working, struggling to attend. I got a position at the Human Sciences Research Council, a research institution. A job that required me to be smart, articulate, a thought leader. A job where communication, verbal communication, is central. I was, on paper, perfect for the role. I had the education. I had the ideas. I had the intellectual capability. But I had the stutter. In a research setting, you're expected to participate in meetings, to present your ideas, to defend your research. You're expected to be able to articulate complex thoughts quickly and competently. I could do that in writing. I could write a proposal that would make your head spin with complexity and rigor. There was a principal researcher, let's call him Richard, who was brilliant and impatient. He was the kind of person who respected intelligence but had zero patience for anything that slowed down the conversation. When I started in meetings, he would just move on. Or interrupt with his own thought. He wasn't being mean. He was just running the meeting at the pace his brain operated at, and my stutter was slowing him down. So I learned to speak less in meetings. I came prepared with written notes that I could leave behind. I emailed summaries of my ideas. I found ways to contribute that didn't require me to speak in real time. This worked, for a while. But it also meant that I never got credit for my ideas in the moment. I was the person who sent good emails. I wasn't the person everyone thought of when they thought about innovative research. I was good at my job. But no one knew it, because I couldn't articulate it aloud. This is the particular cruelty of the professional world for someone who stutters. The institution doesn't care about your disability. It cares about productivity, communication, collaboration. And if your disability affects your ability to communicate in the preferred mode, speaking, then you're at a disadvantage that no amount of competence can overcome. I worked at HSRC for several years. And for several years, I convinced myself that this was just how work was going to be. I would be competent and invisible. I would contribute and not be credited. I would achieve and not be seen. This was the trade-off for being employed. There was a conference. A national conference. And I was asked to present my research. This was a big deal. This was visibility. This was an opportunity to be seen as the researcher I had been trying to hide all along. And I panicked. The presentation itself went okay. I managed it. I was nervous, and that made the stutter worse, but I got through the material. People asked questions. I answered them. But during the Q&A, someone asked a complex question that I hadn't anticipated. It required me to think on my feet, to articulate something I was still formulating. And I blocked. Hard. Right there, in front of maybe 100 people, with my research advisor sitting in the front row watching me fail. The block lasted maybe 5 seconds. But it felt like forever. I could see people getting uncomfortable. I could see my advisor's face shifting. I could see the questioner's face showing something like concern or embarrassment or judgment. And I just stopped. I couldn't push through. I said, I'm not sure I can answer that right now, and moved on. After the conference, I had a conversation with my advisor. He was supportive. He said things like, you did well and you have good ideas. But I could hear what he wasn't saying. That I needed to work on my presentation skills. That I needed to be more confident. That there was something about the way I was showing up that wasn't working. It wasn't his fault. He was right. There was something not working. But the thing that wasn't working wasn't my ideas. It wasn't my research. It was my stutter. And I couldn't fix that. That conference was a turning point. Because that's when I realized that I couldn't keep living this double life. I couldn't keep being smart in private and struggling in public. I couldn't keep hiding and also trying to advance a career that required visibility. Something had to give. And for a long time, I chose to let my career give. I chose to step back from the visible world and retreat into the places where my disability wasn't a liability. I chose, once again, invisibility. I registered for a master's degree in science and technology studies at the University of Stellenbosch while still at HSRC. I completed my master's while still. In 2025 I was admitted for PhD at the University of Stellenbosch. That was my happiest moment in life. In 2026 a lot happened to me. In February I got sick the other day and was admitted at hospital for 8 days. The first day I went back to work I was told my contract would not be renewed. Was devastated and relapsed. I was sick for another 2 weeks. I eventually lost my job. The stress I had, I even deregistered for PhD. The worst thing that happened this year is that my shack I renovated. When I lost my job I lost everything because of fire. I'm going to skip ahead a bit because this next part is important, and it's the part where the story actually changes direction. For years, decades, really, I operated under the assumption that my stutter was something to overcome. That if I just worked hard enough, if I just pushed through enough fear, if I just practiced enough, I could make it go away or make it invisible. What nobody tells you is that some disabilities don't go away. And more importantly, you don't have to make them go away. You don't have to overcome them. You don't have to spend your entire life trying to be someone you're not. The moment that changed for me came when I was in a space, I think it was an academic setting, and someone asked me directly about my stutter. Not as pity. Not as concern. But with genuine curiosity. How long have you been stuttering? They asked. And something in me broke open. Because I realized I'd never actually answered that question honestly. I'd never said, my whole life, with acceptance. I'd always said it like I was confessing to a crime. Like it was something I was ashamed of. I started talking about my stutter. Not as a problem. Not as something I was trying to overcome. But as something that was part of me. Part of how I moved through the world. Part of my story. And something shifted. The person wasn't making pity faces. They weren't offering advice about speech therapy or breathing techniques. They were just listening. And in their listening, I felt less alone in this than I had in years. That conversation led to another conversation. And another. I started talking about my stutter to more people. Started acknowledging it. Started saying things like, I stutter, so I might take a moment to get this out instead of just suffering through silently. And if the problem was the system, then maybe the solution wasn't to change myself. Maybe the solution was to change how people thought about disability. To change the world so that people like me could exist without shame. I was tired of stuttering being invisible, being shameful, being something that disabled people hid while the world moved on around them as if we didn't exist. NAP started small. Very small. It was me and a few other people who started meeting and talking about our experiences. Not trying to fix ourselves. Not doing speech therapy. Just being together. Being witnessed. Being part of a community that understood. For the first time in my life, I was in spaces where my stutter wasn't a problem. It was just a fact. Everyone around me stuttered. We all stuttered differently, but we all understood the basic experience, the shame, the isolation, the way the world makes you small. Through NAPS, I started creating advocacy content. Videos, social media, public-facing work that says, I stutter, and that's not shameful. That's not a deficiency. That's not something I need to hide. I started speaking publicly about my stutter. And yes, I stutter while doing it. Yes, there are moments where I block, where the message is delayed, where people have to wait for me. And that's okay. This is the pivot. This is where the shame starts to transform into something else. Into activism. Into community. Into a different way of existing. But here's the thing about recovery narratives, they're often not true. You don't overcome your disability and become a perfect, fluent version of yourself. You learn to live with it. You learn to find community. You learn to build a life where you don't have to hide. But the stutter. It's still there. I want to be honest about what it's like to stutter publicly now. It's harder than hiding. It's more exposure. It's more vulnerability. But it's also more real. When I give a talk and I stutter, people see it. They see me working. They see the effort. And some of them, not all, but some, they understand. They realize that fluent speech is not a measure of intelligence or worth. They realize that disability is more common than we admit. I still get jobs where people have heard me speak and think twice about hiring me. I still get situations where my stutter affects my professional opportunities. The world hasn't changed that much. But I have changed. I've stopped waiting for the world to become accessible. I've started creating access for myself. I've started building communities and platforms where I don't have to hide. And I've started seeing other people who stutter do the same. Start speaking. Start writing. Start existing without shame. This is the real transformation. Not overcoming the stutter. Learning to live in a world that doesn't accept you, and building your own acceptance way. If you've made it this far, you probably want me to wrap this up with some kind of moral. Some kind of lesson about perseverance or self-love or the power of community. And there are lessons. There are real things I've learned. First, you are not your disability. But your disability is part of you. This isn't a contradiction. It means that your stutter doesn't define your entire existence, but it does shape how you move through the world. Second, shame is the real disability. The stutter itself is neurological. It's manageable. It's part of how I communicate. But the shame is what actually disabled me. The shame is what kept me isolated, hidden, smaller than I should have been. Third, you don't have to overcome your disability to be worthy. You are worthy right now. With your stutter. With your difference. With all the parts of you that don't fit into what the world says a person should be. Fourth, the world isn't broken because you're disabled. The world is broken because it was built for a very narrow version of normal, and everyone who doesn't fit that version is told they're the problem. Fifth, community saves lives. Literal community. Other people who understand. Other disabled people. Other people who've been isolated and found their way out. Find your people. They're there. And sixth, your voice matters. Even if it comes out stuttered. Even if it comes out slowly. Even if people have to wait for you. Your voice matters. I stuttered today. I probably always will. Some days the stutter is barely noticeable. Some days I can barely get a sentence out. Some days I'm still afraid. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of taking up too much space. Afraid that my worth is measured in how fluently I can speak. But now I know those fears aren't based in reality. They're based in years of being told I was wrong, broken, lesser. And I'm working every day to undo that internalized message. If you're watching this because you stutter, I want you to know. You're not alone. And you're not broken. And your disability is not your fault and it's not your shame to carry. If you're watching this because someone you love stutters, I want you to know. Be patient. Actually be patient, not just performatively patient. Understand that fluent speech is not a measure of intelligence or worth. Understand that making someone feel like they're a burden is a form of violence. And if you're watching this because you're just curious about what it's like to stutter, now you know. It's not tragedy. It's not inspiration porn. It's not inspiration at all. It's just a different way of moving through the world. And the world could be a lot kinder if it made space for different ways. This is my story. My voice. Stuttered, halting sometimes, but here. And it matters. Thank you for listening.